Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy for Nerds by Nerds. I'm Nerdicus David. Today I'm joined by Chris Perkins from Wizards of the Coast.
Greetings.
How are you doing today? What is your official title over there? I feel like an idiot for not actually knowing that off the top of my head.
I'm a principal game designer on D&D.
Yeah, so you guys agreed to come on and talk about some of the things that you've got going on right now, which I really appreciate it. It's pretty exciting. I almost met you in person at my first Origins when you guys were in the middle of playing House on the Hill, the
Oh,
Baldur's
okay.
Gate, the Baldur's Gate
Wow, that was
edition.
some time ago.
Yeah, yeah, over at Maze Arcana, and I
Hmm.
didn't realize that you guys were in the break when the haunt first happens. So you had walked away, and I had come up to just say hello, and then like you were like laser focused on the game, and I was like, oh, the haunt just happened. They're not done.
Yeah. I'm laser focused most of the time. If you're going to get my attention, you have to throw something at my head.
Flare gun, maybe.
Yeah,
That's
something.
that's not a bad quality to have.
No, it served me well over the years. It's probably gotten me where I am today, so I can't complain.
Yeah. So you had mentioned just before we got started that you're starting to get some of the feedback, or some of the stories are coming back of what's going on with Rime of the Frost Maiden in people's games. So what kind of stuff
Yeah,
are you hearing?
just a little, because of course Rhyme released what last month.
Yeah.
Time is so weird these days with quarantine and everything. It's easy to lose track of, and but now that it's out there and people are starting to run it, I'm hearing from DMs who are kind of picking it apart and finding the parts that they like and are thinking about running those sections. I'm also hearing that it's too real. The in today's day and time, with everybody in isolation, this is just echoing it on a level that's a little surreal for some folks, and that's kind of fun. Because of course, when we started work on this book, it was 2 years ago. There wasn't even a gleam of COVID
Yeah,
or
yeah.
pandemic, um, but it's a clear case of life imitating art, and so that seems to be resonating with folks.
It
There's
really just depends on which conspiracy theory you're listening to, though.
Yes, yeah, and because of the way the adventure is sort of set up in the beginning, there's so many different ways it can start. There are like many different starting quests, and so I'm just hearing sort of getting a handle on which starting quests are getting used, which there was one DM was telling me that they're going to use the starting quest, which is the mountain climb, and I just cautioned them. There's an avalanche encounter in there. You might want to, uh, if you're a mean DM, you can probably take out your entire party. But the idea is, you want it to be scary but fun for the group. It's no fun if they just get wiped down the mountain and that's the end of the adventure.
Yeah, you can't scare them anymore when they're just dead.
Exactly. And since Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frost Maiden, is meant to be a horror story, you've got to build up that tension. You got to let them endure for, as long as possible in order to build up that kind of dread.
So, what were the challenges of creating a horror story since you guys already did Ravenloft, and
Yeah.
making it still a unique experience?
Well, Ravenloft, of course, is firmly embedded in the gothic horror genre. And so uh, there are certain tropes that work really well in gothic horror, and we really played with those. But with this story, we lean more into contemporary horror. The difference being really that there is something kind of romantic about gothic horror, and at the same time, also something. What's the word I'm looking for? Charming about those sort of early Universal Pictures monster movies like Dracula and Frankenstein, the James Whale pictures. There's an ambiance to them, and there's kind of a weird sense of a more innocent time. People seem to have like more innocent sensibilities, whereas in the modern horror, contemporary horror, you're dealing with a much more sophisticated audience, and the horror tends to be more gritty and primal and real. You're not dealing necessarily with the horror of some beast that's been some artificial man who's been awakened with electricity. You're dealing with the horror of the ruthless cold, the shearing wind, the isolation, the paranoia that emerges when people are confined for too long and don't have enough to do, and don't have enough food to survive. Like real world survivalist kind of stuff. And so we kind of leaned much more heavily into that with Icewind Dale. And we turned to movies like The Thing for inspiration, which of course, The Thing is about a group of people who are stuck together in a cold environment. There's nowhere for them to go, but they know there's a monster in their midst. And when it dawns on them that any of them could be that monster, the paranoia sinks in, and suddenly the whole society begins to fall apart. Those are sort of themes that we could play with in this setting. It works really, really well in Icewind Dale.
Are you a horror fan?
I am. Yes, I am. I this time of year is especially delightful for me because I get to rewatch some of my favorite horror films.
Yeah, I feel like this is a big time of year for gamers in general.
Mm-hmm.
Even I guess even for us that aren't like super into horror, I, I'm ambivalent towards horror. I think I'm not like
Mm-hmm.
not I'm not against it, but I'm not
Right.
like a super fan. My wife is not into horror, so
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't like a big deal when I started watching less of it. I should say.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, there are times when I don't want to watch it or have anything to do with it, but this time of year, it's easy to it's easy to kind of put on a horror movie when I'm just doing something else in the house. And I mean, I like some of the old stuff. I like campy stuff too. I'm not very judgmental when it comes to horror. I'll watch just about anything, and I know a lot of it isn't good. It's
Yeah,
not like
yeah.
good cinema, but I admire what it takes to actually try to scare somebody. That takes some craft to
Yeah,
actually.
I think it's even harder in a game like D&D than
It
some
is.
other RPGs.
It is because, of course, at the game table, you only have so much control over, the temperaments of the people at the table and what they're feeling in any given moment. But as you know, with role-playing games, there's always large injections of humor. There's non sequiturs. There's all these sort of unexpected die roll induced moments. You're dealing with a game where randomness is sort of built into the game, so that inevitably breeds humor and craziness and plans collapsing and nothing going right. It's hard to sustain an aura of dread when people are laughing at fart jokes
Yeah.
and what they watched on TV 2 nights ago.
I mean, also too, like D&D is kind of really steeped in we kill the monster, we take their stuff, right? Like it doesn't have to be. I mean,
Yes.
there's tons of ways to play the game,
No, that's a really good point. the
and
the sort of mentality of, okay, the idea of this game is to just kill whatever we see, take their stuff and go home. If you're trying to build a story around the terror of the vampire living in the castle and the players are not feeling any of that fear, they just intend to go and murder him and take his stuff, it's really hard to capture that horror. You have to really work hard as a DM to get the players in a different headspace.
so Ken wants to know what are your favorite horror films?
That's a good question. I don't know if it's technically classified as a horror film, but I love Jaws.
Yeah.
It's actually the first movie I ever remember watching in a theater. My parents
Yeah, I
took me to
think
see it.
so. There's different kinds of horror. Like that's definitely
Yeah,
like suspenseful and thriller. And people
yeah,
are
but I
getting
also like
eaten.
I grew up in the late 70s, early 80s at a young impressionable age. So slasher films do have a soft spot in my heart. So I like, John Carpenter's Halloween. I like Wes Craven's Nightmare on Elm Street. But then I'm a huge fan of, as I mentioned previously, the James Whale pictures, mostly
Yeah.
because they're so atmospheric. Um, uh, so the Frankensteins, the Invisible Man. Um, uh, Other horror films that I like include some sillier fare like The Lost Boys, which was made in the mid 80s. Even the more recent, have you seen the horror anthology Trick or Treat?
I have not.
The Michael Dougherty film. It's sort of a love letter to Halloween, and I kind of love it for that. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a great movie, but it's kind of like a movie that I like to watch this time of year. Um, Other horror movies, I'm actually just scrolling through my phone right now.
Yeah.
Aliens is one of my favorites. The Cabin in the Woods, if you want something a little bit more contemporary. I like The Conjuring, but I don't like the fact that a dog dies. I hate movies in which dogs die. Some
You have a
people,
dog, right? Milo?
yeah, I do. He's right here. He's sitting next to me, waiting for the garbage trucks to come by so he can bark his head off.
It's a very exciting time of day.
Yeah, yeah. I think probably the horror movie that I've seen the most is probably Halloween. I don't know
Comes
why
on
I've seen
every
it so
year
many
or
times.
so.
Yeah, exactly. There's something
Yeah.
there's something very simple and spare about it, which I really like.
When you're mentioning some of those movies, it just makes me think back to being a kid and getting the 3D glasses from, I think, Burger
Mm,
King for
mm-hmm.
like Creature from the Black Lagoon.
Yes. 3D was flirted with pretty heavily when I was a youngster. So I probably had dozens of pairs of 3D glasses lying around the house.
Again, it wasn't very good, but it's what we
No,
had.
no, it was bad tech. It was really, really bad. I just downloaded the sort of remaked version or the revamped version of Nosferatu, the classic Murnau film with a score sort of reconstructed. That's fun to have on while you're doing other things, just because the music is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Sort of
So
takes you back.
admittedly, we don't really use too many pre-written adventures. Like we buy them all,
Mm.
and at this point we get sent most of them. But initially, we always just, I guess we're more collectors, and we also like to cherry pick stuff. So I hadn't actually gotten around to going through Frost Maiden. So I was going through, and I was like, "You guys threw in some really cute monsters this time around."
Oh yeah, we like to do that. We've been doing that lately in a number of our more recent adventures, just to acknowledge the fact that in people, hundreds of thousands of DMs are going to run this adventure, and every DM sort of gloms onto something different or finds something that they can latch onto. And we found that if we put in a few cute pets for DMs to play with, that a lot of players really like that stuff, either because it's unexpected or because it's a little it almost feels a little out of place, and it's sort of, they can, like the Chewingas, for instance, that appear. Those guys have appeared in another adventure before, but we brought them back because people really like them and they're super cute and they kind of break up the monotony of the horror. They're sort of a surprising, delightful, and unexpected element. But we'll also put in things like, hey, there's actually stats for the hare, like the little rabbit. And so we've got a cute little picture of a bunny rabbit that we actually commissioned for the book. We did that because we know that if you're in the Arctic North and you're a wizard, maybe you want a familiar that looks like something native to the area. And we don't offer, little white rabbit familiars to DMs or to players in the core rules. And so we just threw it in because it was thematically appropriate. And we know some wizard out there is going to groove on it, or some druid is going to want to turn into it because they see the picture and they think, oh, that's so sweet.
I was looking at the gnome squidling and its mental tickle, and I'm like, And I was like, mental tickle, what's that? And then I read, I'm like, that's not a tickle at all.
Yeah, it's sort of a diminished version of the Mind Flayer's Mind Blast.
Yeah.
But because the gnome squidling is kind of like a degenerate mind flayer, a mind flayer that didn't quite come out right. And because it's sort of small and scrawny and weak, we thought that its mind blast would be similarly diminished. And so Mind Tickle felt like a more appropriate name for this thing. It can still, it can still stun you, which can be bad because if you are stunned by it and it attaches its tentacles to you, it can do some serious damage. But the tickle has got like a DC 7
Yeah.
saving throw, so you have to be a really unlucky character to fall victim to it.
I might be said unlucky character the way I roll dice. Also, pairing it with an intellect devour would make it extra nasty as well.
Yes, well, intellect devours are surprisingly nasty, actually.
There's a
Um,
there's a couple monsters that seem to punch way above their challenge. Those and shadows in particular.
Shadows are dangerous in numbers because if you encounter like 6 of them, they can take a character down pretty quickly.
Yeah, I had a party that kind of ran through most of the stuff I put out, and they were like, I want to say they were like eighth, ninth level, and I threw in like 2 or 3 shadow encounters back to back, and it sent them fleeing. And it was the
Yeah,
first time, and not even like huge numbers of them.
it's funny because in Rhyme, there's actually an encounter with a mob of shadows in a place called the Caves of Hunger. And when I was running the adventure, and as sort of doing a little bit of playtesting on my own, the characters got to that area, and I actually had to sort of scale the shadows back. I
Yeah.
had to sort of give them a loathing of light so that the players could actually drive them off because I was afraid they were going to just TPK the whole group. And we were taught, I was like, this was a group of, beefy characters and they were just
Yeah.
getting mauled.
Yeah, they're brutal. I have heard some grumblings on the interwebs. Imagine that. That some of the encounters are a bit tough.
Mm.
Frost Maiden.
Yeah, I think that, so we did a lot with all of our adventures. We send it out to hundreds of playtesters and we use that feedback to help weigh encounters. In fact, one of the main reasons why we playtest the adventures is simply to gauge encounter difficulty. And the feedback that we got from the groups was, as you can expect with such a large number of playtesters, it was all over the place. Some groups thought the adventure is too easy. Some groups said the adventure is too hard. Some said this encounter is too easy. Some said this encounter is too hard. A lot of them say it's just fine, and that's great. And so we kind of take stock of all of it. We weigh it all, and then we make decisions based on that. And there were certain encounters that, based on the playtest feedback, we knew they were going to be challenging, but the majority of groups were able to overcome them, so we left it alone. In other cases, they were identified as challenging, and the majority of groups did not do well against them. And so we scaled those back. But inevitably, when the adventure goes out, not to hundreds of playtesters, but to hundreds of thousands of players, what you're going to find, or what we always find, is that there will always be a certain percentage of groups, either because they're unlucky or suboptimal, or they just make a bad choice, or because the encounter is, just too tough for them, given their composition and how their DM runs the encounter, that they're going to have a tough time. And we make the adventures, we scale the adventures as best we can based on the playtest feedback we get. And I'm never surprised when I hear online comments like, "Oh, we went through that encounter and we just got destroyed. This is too hard." But I can point to playtesters or playtest groups that said the exact opposite. So
Yeah.
that's the nature of D&D. That's the nature of the game. And I think it's what I would like to do. And I think, and I will say that the DMG really doesn't do a good enough job, I think, of doing this, is arm the DMs better to deal with encounters on the fly, like to be able to tell before the party gets wiped out which way the encounter is going, and then be able to make adjustments on the fly to make the encounter a more manageable thing. I think that kind of advice, that kind of guidance does a better service to the game than sweating over, individual encounters.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's just one of those things that comes with experience.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
a lot of it too. If you got a new DM, let's say, they might be running the encounter very strictly because they think that that's how it should be run. But of course, the more experienced DM will know that really the goal of the game is for everybody to have fun, and you've got to keep your thermometer in check and make sure that the players are having fun.
yeah. So sometimes you get into it and you're a round or two in and you go, "Oh, this is going
Oh,
differently than I
yeah.
anticipated." And also the dice are like this extra player at the table that's going to weigh in from time to time, and we just don't know in what
Yes.
direction.
Yeah, when I one of the encounters in Rime of the Frost Maiden, I did a lot of playtesting, particularly on the starting quests, because you want to make sure that the starting quests are fun. Because if they don't think the starting quests are fun, they probably won't get to the true meat of the
You
adventure.
got to hook them in the beginning.
Exactly. And so when I was playtesting a bunch of the starting quests myself, I exactly as you said, there was one game I was running at a convention. I think it may have been at Gamehole Con one year, and my dice were killer. I was just critting and critting and critting. I was rolling it out in the open so the players could see, just like 20, 20, 20. And within 2.5 rounds, 3 out of the 5 or 6 characters were down. And I'm just like, okay. This is why we have DM screens, so the DM can actually, hide a roll from time to time and maybe kind of temper things. But sometimes the dice are cruel, like you say. It's that other player, and they can be obnoxious, and they can just turn the entire encounter on its head.
Yeah, and they can also pivot on a dime too. Like
Mm-hmm.
you just never know.
Oh yeah.
I tend to roll my dice out in the open. I used to not, but I kind of like just like letting it fly, and the players can see what's going on, and
Yeah, if
what
you have if
happens
you
happens.
yeah, that's great, because at that point in time it's very transparent, and the players can't blame you. They can blame your dice, but
Yeah, and
that's
also, you know, you can. There's other ways to tailor an encounter than a fudging
mhm.
dice anyway, right?
Yeah.
You can half the hit points. You can double the hit points. You can,
Yes, there's still a
you know,
lot of secret behind the screen stuff that you can manage. You can
yeah,
also have monsters that behave in uncharacteristic ways. Like, a monster doesn't have to fight to the death. A monster that even has an advantage in combat might choose to break off the combat for reasons of its own. Maybe it's just tired of fighting. Maybe it's sprained an ankle. Like maybe it thinks this is too much trouble, that it's more trouble than it's worth. I'm going to get the hell out of here. There's not everything has to be a fight to the death.
I mean, even in like the last game I ran, last session I ran, I had the carrion crawler grab one of the NPCs and try and beat feet, which gives the players kind of more opportunities to do things while it's doing that. But
Yes.
sometimes it just makes sense. Like it just wants to
Yeah.
eat.
And sometimes a monster just makes bad choices.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be optimized.
So, one of our regulars, Joe, always asks something or other about dragons. Are there any new dragons in this book?
Oh yes.
I know the
um,
answer.
there are. I mean, you can't do a story in the frozen north without white dragons, but we've seen white dragons before.
Yeah.
Now, one of the white dragons that you meet in this adventure is unusual in that she's got a long storied history in the realms, and she's very old and partially blind, and she can't see past 60 feet, which makes for some interesting tactics in dealing with her. But I think the dragon that is going to strike terror into the hearts of most people who play this adventure is this guy.
The chonky boy.
Yes, the chonky boy. He's not a real flesh and blood dragon. He was constructed, and this dragon construct is basically the terror of 10 towns. and plays a very, very important and potentially devastating role in the heart of the adventure. And the decision to include this guy was it's always nice in a Dungeons and Dragons adventure when we can have a dragon as a threat.
It's in
But
the name.
yeah, exactly. So that's always good. Always great to throw in a dragon. But I wanted in this story 10 Towns to be a character in a way that the characters could come to know, and if not love, at least, appreciate. So 10 Towns is this cluster of settlements that basically is the flickering candlelights of civilization in Icewind Dale. And one of the core things of this story is there is a threat to 10 Towns that could potentially wipe out all of the settlements. And the characters can either choose to help 10 Towns or they can just let these settlements die. But if the settlements die, the characters will have literally nowhere to go back to in Icewind Dale. They will basically be cutting off their noses if they just let 10 Towns fall by the wayside. But then we had to figure out what's a good threat. What would scare the crap out of the people of 10 Towns? What would make their walls useless?
They've already contended with a few different hordes, so
yeah, they've dealt with a lot over the years. Anybody who's read the Driss novels knows that 10 Towns has fended off armies of orcs and demons and other things over the years. So we wanted something that felt novel and new. We wanted something that would not be inhibited by the inclement weather. And we wanted something that that players on a meta level wouldn't know how to deal with. Like, I know a number of players who've read the monster manual backwards, forwards. They know what a white dragon can do. They have no idea what this dragon can do. It's a total cipher mystery to them.
Nice. So Wally DM wants to know, Chris, when can we see you return to the DM screen for weekly D&D games? We miss you.
Oh, that's a fair question. I don't know. I'm a lot of work has filled the vacuum, and so I'm much busier than I used to be. So part of it is just a scheduling challenge, but part of it too is actually deliberate. I think that from the Acquisitions Inc. games into the weekly streamed games, people know what my DMing is like. They know kind of what they're getting into, but I think this is a great time for me to kind of step away and let people kind of discover what else is out there. There are other DMs out there doing absolutely amazing stuff. They're better DMs than I am. And I'm just frankly looking forward to, seeing, which ones kind of find their audience, which ones grow and become, star DM attractions in their own right. So I'm kind of enjoying this period right now where I can just kind of sit back and be a fan and see what else is coming up, and what new games are surfacing and which ones are doing well, and actually just kind of seeing how other people do their thing, how other people DM. As part of my role on the Wizards team, often my focus tends to be on story or providing DM advice. And I just like to watch how other people run our game and try to learn from that, and then try to figure out, how do I build stuff for them? And so because of all of these things going on, it's not like I've been missing DMing, and I still DM on my own. Like, I've got a regular game that I run, and I'm in a regular campaign as well. So there's lots of D&D in my life. Part of it is, do I really want to go through the rigmarole of a show and have it kind of locked down in a schedule, and then have it be a commitment that I have to maintain in addition to everything else? It's a lot to bear right now, particularly in this COVID era, when we're all just sort of, scraping by and trying to not go quietly insane in our own dungeons.
So I think you answered the question I was going to ask, and that's, do you watch other streamed games? Um, do you think that's a good representation of how people are playing the game, though, uh, as opposed to, like, what they're doing at home?
Well, it's a good representation of how people are playing the game online, but there's a difference to how people play online versus how they play just in the comforts of their own home or in private. Um, I think that's a fair question. I think the answer is no, yes, no. Um, uh, the technology has gotten to the point now where online games are feeling much closer to the around the table games than they ever have before. Um, and there are of course tools. Some DMs are very light on tools. They're very theater of the mind. Other DMs really kind of lean heavily into Roll20 and fantasy grounds and other things to sort of pump up their games and add kind of visual or tactical elements to them. But the truth is, there's no right way or wrong way to play this game. And you got to do as a DM what your players are going to enjoy most, because if they're not having fun, they're not going to come back for another week, And so I learn a lot, or at least I sort of internalize a lot if I see DMs struggling or if the game seems to be slowing down. I'm always thinking, okay, what's causing that? Is it the technology that's getting in the way of the fun? Is it the DM is not really planned things out properly that's getting in the way of the fun? Is it the chemistry of the group that's getting in the way of the fun? I'm very analytical and very perceptive, and so I just like to watch. I can't of course barge into your living room like the Kool-Aid man and sit in on your game. So the best I can do is watch how games are being played
That
online, or
I
to go to
believe,
conventions, which I can't go to anymore because of COVID. But
yeah, yeah, I believe that right is reserved for Jeremy Crawford when you're using the rules wrong.
actually, Jeremy will be the first to tell you that the first rule of D&D is, have fun. The second rule of D&D is the rules are there to serve you. You're not there to serve the rules.
No, absolutely. Um, People get hung up on that a lot.
They do.
So you're probably the first celebrity GM. You're the one that started it all.
Well, if celebrity GM means, I don't even know. I'm not quite sure what that means, but
None of us do. It's
um,
okay.
uh, but certainly when I was first approached to start doing podcast D&D games, there was really nothing else to compare it to. In fact, when the folks at Penny Arcade came to me and said, "Hey, we want to do a D&D podcast," I said, "Why? Like, why would people want to listen to other people playing a game? That's dumb."
I I feel that on such a level because when we were fairly early to the space on YouTube, and there at that time the only person streaming was it me JP, I think. D&D. I mean, there were like some one-off things. Like I think Satine Phoenix had a thing that she did before YouTube that was they used like Ustream. If I don't even know if that even exists anymore, for like a celebrity thing they would do annually. Like, so there was some like one-off stuff like that, but I think Acquisitions Inc. was kind of like the
Yeah, Acquisitions Inc. was the first
beginning
one
of it
that
all.
kind of it started off as a podcast, which is kind of like listening to a radio play, and then people liked it so much we decided to actually videotape them, and the chemistry of the group was so strong that people then wanted to see them live. I think when the live game started, that's when I first realized that this could be something absolutely titanically huge. That the spectator entertainment value of watching a D&D game when you have funny people or entertaining people involved, can do things for the game and bring people into the game like never before. So Yeah, I feel like I was certainly on the kind of first wave, and Acquisitions Inc. was like a proof of concept for a lot of people, because I think when I'm dead and gone, chances are pretty good that Ac Inc. will be the thing I'm remembered for. And because it brought so many people into the hobby,
Yeah.
people would watch it. They'd go to a PAX convention, watch it live, knowing nothing about D&D, and come out and be absolutely ravenous to play, because it demystified the game. It said, "Oh, I don't. It's not like a nerd thing where I have to sit down and read a textbook before I start playing. These goofballs are just getting on stage and making shit up." And that's essentially
It's
what.
not a bad thing to be remembered for. I mean, most of us aren't going to be remembered for anything. Yeah, Acquisitions Inc.'s a pretty cool thing. Do you
Yeah,
remember
it's
how big the first audience was?
um, the first live the first live audience was limited in some respects simply by the space that we had. We were in a kind of a theater room, and I remember we had like just folding tables that we were sitting behind, on a makeshift stage. It was pretty
That can
low
be even
production.
more intimidating sometimes because a larger space may not fill out as much as a smaller space. And when you see like, a packed crowd
Yeah,
and
it was
probably
packed,
people
and there were like
standing.
people just standing up against the
uh,
back walls watching this thing. It was probably, I want to say, maybe like 600 to 800 people. Um, the the most surreal moment was the first time we performed live at Benaroya Hall in Seattle, which is of course the big opera house, and there are thousands of people, and there are balconies, right?
yeah.
Like, and just packed with people, just wall of people and lights. And then I'm like, what the hell is going on? What am I doing up here? I do not belong here. Somebody get me off the stage.
Yeah, I imagine it's got to be super bizarre. I mean, I feel like most GMs just get kind of like pre-game jitters with their friends, and
Mm-hmm.
then you're talking about like thousands of people, hundreds of
Yeah.
people, out
And
there that
I'm
you
I'm
don't
an
know.
I'm an introvert. You would not, under normal circumstances, be able to drag me out, uh, and put me up in that kind of situation. The only reason I did it, and continue to do it, was a the butterflies would fade as soon as I started playing, because then of course you're just playing a D&D game. It doesn't matter that there are thousands of people out
Yeah.
there. You don't. They all sort of fall away into the shadows, and suddenly it's just like, you're with your gaming group all over again.
The tunnel vision
Uh,
sets in.
exactly. And also the people I'm playing with were lovely. What a joy and a privilege to be able to DM for such a fantastic group of people. Why wouldn't I? But then there's also the fact that D&D is very important to a lot of people on a level that I can barely articulate. For them, it's a lifeline. It if it doesn't give their lives meaning, at least it makes them feel like they belong somewhere in the world, that they've got a dedicated group of friends who care about them. I've heard so many stories from people who have watched the Ac Inc. games, and it has literally changed their lives or saved their lives. And when I hear those stories, it's hard for me then to just say, "Oh, I shouldn't do this anymore because I don't like being on stage." That's a poor excuse for um, uh, 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 that's a selfish reason not to do something that can be so impactful and important for so many people. And role-playing games in general, D&D in particular, it's a game that you never fall out of love with, right? And the friends that you make playing D&D tend to be people that you're friends with for the entirety of your life. And that kind of bond, that kind of unity, that kind of opportunity to feel like there is a place in the world for you, and that there are people who care about you, and there are people who want to hear your stories, and they want to follow your character's journey. That's important to us as human beings, and it's important for me in that kind of role where I'm kind of doing these public things, to show that this is here, this exists, and you can take advantage of it, and there's nothing stopping you, and it's not hard. It can it can give you something in your life that you never knew you needed.
Yeah, I mean, for us, like, the weirdest thing was like the first time you get those messages or emails about how, you know, just us talking about or playing this game has affected someone. It really does open your eyes and kind of changes your perspective.
Mhm.
Because it's always just been like this little quirky, silly thing I like to do for
Right.
fun.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, but
yeah,
there's real power in storytelling. I think people crave stories, and they want to follow characters, and they want to follow characters' journeys because those journeys are often more interesting than the journeys of real people in real life. And so what I discovered, particularly when I started doing Dice Camera Action, the weekly live stream show, is that journey is so important to people, that they will carve real time out of their schedules to invest in it, to do art for it, like fan art and stuff like
yeah.
that. It takes on a life far greater than the game itself, because those characters are so compelling. Their journeys, their choices, their arcs. It's like a favorite television show for a lot of people. It became people's favorite television show.
And I feel like even more so because of the venue, right? Because when we're streaming them, or even in person, because live events have always had a different kind of feel to them. No
Yeah,
matter what. That's why I like
yeah.
going to the circus, music. All of those things have just their own energy. But
Hmm.
with streaming, because you have the chat function, people can connect and with each other while it's going on. So it makes them feel so much more involved.
Absolutely,
So
yes.
Jorfton wants to know any older settings you'd love to write an adventure for.
Oh, yes. So many. I'm a big fan of kind of bringing making people who maybe are new to the game aware of D&D's past. Even, there are parts of D&D's past that are probably best left in the past, but I'm a big fan of nostalgia. Of course, I've done this before. uh, Ravenloft was one that we've already tackled. Most recently, I just want to show this. I don't know if you've got a copy of this yet.
I have not checked out the revamp. This is like the first
Look how big
5e
this
adventure
monster
I'm
is.
going through is DM Jazzy Hands on Twitter
Oh yeah,
is
yeah.
running us through Curse of Strahd. He's doing a fantastic job. And, you know, actually, even like the content that we create was influenced heavily by Curse of Strahd because it was a shift in how you guys started doing NPCs.
Mm.
It was changed, and we really grabbed onto it and really enjoyed that. We're a little disappointed when it went away from it in Dragon Heist, but I just felt like there were so much better NPCs than use stat block X or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. There's, I mean, so I was always fond of Ravenloft, the original 1983 adventure by Tracy and Laura Hickman, and I literally jumped at the chance to uh, expand upon it in fifth edition, um, because it was so uncharacteristic of a D&D adventure back in 1983. Um, as you mentioned earlier, D&D was largely very much a dungeon crawl experience in its formative stages, and a lot of the early adventures reflected that. But here was a D&D adventure that broke away from the mold and sort of pinned itself to this very complex villain, with sort of uh, and kind of took a D&D monster, the vampire, and really kind of used it to the full. And whenever I think about going back and looking at old settings and bringing them forward, I'm trying to find some kernel or some nugget, something about that setting that will resonate with the audience, will resonate on some human level, will resonate because of the time we're in or the circumstances that we're dealing with in the present. I'm looking for that sort of deeper layer of resonance. So I have no interest in just going back to a setting to bring it back unless there's a good reason to do so. Like it feels like the right time for whatever reason. And um, but and of course, I'm also trying to keep my mind open for what the audience wants or is ready for. Like if a lot of people seem to be conjuring fond memories of one of our old settings and it's getting mentioned again and again and again, then maybe there's a reason to bring it back if there's a good story that we can attach to it. And I think that's the key, is what's the story behind our reason for doing this.
And I mean, obviously, some settings are much easier to bring back than others. Like Dark Sun is super complex in comparison to most of the other settings, just because it
Yeah,
strays so far from typical D&D.
right. You do have to kind of burn some things down with Dark Sun, and make some core assumption changes. Like as soon as you say, "Hey, here's a setting without clerics," for instance, you're taking something that you know is pretty integral to core D&D and saying, "Oh, that doesn't actually play here," which can be kind of weird. So there are definitely certain challenges with some of our older settings as far as updating them. Um, but
And then,
I'm,
so I'm not kind of the opinion too that a lot of that information is out there, right? So
yes,
if you're
yes.
playing Greyhawk, Dragonlance, things that are kind of more closer to standard D&D, like
Mhm.
you don't really need updated rule sets for those. You can still play them and have fun, and you might have to do like some minor tweaks. Although I
Yeah.
will say, Dark Sun had, or not Dark Sun, but Ravenloft had some really cool um, supplements that had come out with it. The Van Richten guides, the box set for the Dread Domains, all of that stuff was
I loved the Van
amazing.
Richten guides. They were just great reading. Like I could never incorporate all that information into a game. It was just too much, but it just made for fun reading and kind of helped immerse me in the setting. I think that, as you pointed out, that material still exists. Like you can go to DM's Guild or somewhere else and get basically a PDF download of all the old Van Richten's guides. And that information, because it's largely edition agnostic, can easily transport into 5e. Like we don't necessarily have to, we at Wizards don't have to do that work for you if you're really keen on getting that information. What we have to do at Wizards is figure out what are good products for the fifth edition line, for the fifth edition audience, that and what's the hook, what's new about them, what's a better way of framing the information, given how people consume information these days. Like I I'm pretty convinced, based on data I have and evidence I've seen, that people are busier now. DMs are busier now than they were, 10 years ago or 20 years ago. They don't have as much prep time because they have too many things competing for their attention. And so if we just say repackaged an old campaign setting and kind of threw it out there, here's the 5e version of a second edition campaign setting. My concern would be DMs wouldn't be able to use it or optimize it because they don't have time to do all the prep that would be needed to basically create a campaign around this product. One of the key tenets, I think, of fifth edition is when you buy a book, we want to make sure you're using it. You may not use 100% of it, but we want to make sure that it's actually getting played, because what we discovered with, particularly in third and fourth edition, is people would often buy books, put them on a shelf, and never open them again. And that seems like a suboptimal thing, because eventually you're going to look at that shelf groaning under the weight of all those books and say,
Yeah,
why am I doing this to myself?
that is so accurate. And I mean, that's been like one of the biggest changes too from 5e to previous editions, is that you guys have been more deliberate about the content that you put out. Some of that
Yeah.
stuff, some of those things I really like, and other things I kind of miss. Like, with the everythings that have come out and are coming out, it's like there's not a whole lot of surprises in those products as a consumer, right? Because you guys are very methodical now about, and I understand why you guys are trying to get it right and give people what they want, but at the same time, the downside to that is we lose some of those surprises because we've
Yeah.
seen it all in
Well,
UA.
oh yeah, like for instance, the UA reveals of the various subclasses and things that will
Yeah,
end up going in Tasha's. Yeah, there's definitely some of that, and some of that, of course, is transparency. Some of that is we want to make sure that the stuff we're putting in the game has been adequately tested so that it doesn't cause your game to blue screen
Yeah.
when you use it, which was an issue in early editions. We would often fire stuff out without sufficient play testing, and then people would interact with it, and suddenly their games would be less fun because of it. And so, yeah, the trade-off is with more transparency comes less surprise. But hopefully, particularly in the coming years, now that we've kind of got a solid base of products out there, we can start to surprise you.
Yeah. I know, like, because we would review the Unearthed Arcanas, and we could be curmudgeony at times. Which, as we got to meet you more of the staff in person, it got harder to be curmudgeony against you. But like, damn it, now they're people.
God damn it.
Yeah. But it's like, and also some of the things were just like us having to understand like your process. It's like, oh, they're not being lazy by using this mechanic over and over again or boring. They're just trying to figure it out. Like they want this tested thoroughly to see how it works from the design angle of things.
Yes. And I think part of being custodians of the game rather than creators of the game means that we've got to shepherd. Our products have to be carefully shepherded. And, you know, we want to make sure everybody's having fun. At the same time, we know that we're always bringing in new gamers. You know, and those new gamers have their own needs, but they also have a learning curve, right? And so part of our challenge is making that learning curve easier, making onboarding easier, making the game more friendly for new folks who have never played role-playing games before. Because D&D is often their first role-playing game. It may not be their last, but it's often their first. And so, you know, when we released the starter game in 2014, we thought that was a pretty decent, simple way to get in with a nice adventure attached to it. When we did Essentials, we took all the teachings that we learned from the starter experience and kind of amped up our game somewhat and created, I think, what was a better box set experience. And that's been doing very well. Every product that we release is basically an opportunity for us to learn, for us to gauge what the audience wants/needs, and for us to try to anticipate ways that we can make the experience easier to learn and fun for groups going forward. For our big adventures, every adventure is an opportunity to try something new, to present information slightly differently so that it's easier for DMs to digest. That's a slow process. You know, we're making incremental improvements with every product, and some of them are invisible and some of them are obvious. What we don't want to do is be in the business of selling unhappiness to people where they pick up a book and they feel they can't use any of it, or it's not speaking to them, or, you know, we've released 3 books in a row and none of them have appealed to you. You know, we know not every book is going to appeal to every person, but hopefully there's something that we're releasing this year that you might like and use.
Yeah, I imagine being custodians of the game and not creators, like you said, has got to be super challenging. You know, you have to deal with all the baggage of the past. You have to modernize, and you know, you're trying to, you know, appeal to new gamers and new players while also maintaining the old audience. And essentially, you're never going to make everyone happy anyway. Are there any sacred cows you would like to see killed off?
Killed off. Blah, 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 blah. Sacred cows. I mean, there are things that are so tethered to D&D's legacy that I don't think we could really get rid of them if we tried. Or, you know, we might be able to tweak what they do or how they work. One thing that springs to mind is experience points.
Yeah.
You know, experience points have been part of the D&D game forever. The words experience points have been taken by hundreds of other games over the years and repurposed. But they started basically with D&D. That's something that, you know, I know for a fact. I'm not very methodical when it comes to counting experience points. Most DMs are not methodical when it comes to tallying experience points. But still, gaining levels is measured in terms of how many experience points you have. Um, that's something that I constantly struggle with. Like, how can we keep experience points relevant when a lot of DMs think that they're just noise in the system, you know? And one way to do that is say, okay, well, yes, you get experience points for monsters, but a lot of games, that's kind of sending a weird message where, the more
Yeah.
murderous you are, the faster you gain levels. It's If you run a game where killing things is not really the aim, then maybe we need a stricter system for experience point awards based on story achievements or personal growth of a character, or you know uh, maybe it's just simply a session based system. You get X amount of experience points every time you finish a session. There are all kinds of ways you can skin that cat, but I find myself in a situation where if I asked 100 DMs what I should do with experience points, I'll get 100 different answers.
Yeah, I feel like third edition actually addressed that fairly well, as everything had a CR, but you could award the experience for overcoming the challenge, not necessarily
Yes.
killing the monster,
And
right?
we actually say that in fifth edition as well. We say that the awards that you get for a monster don't necessarily reflect you killing it. It can mean you outsmarting it, negotiating with it, bypassing it. There are lots of ways you can get those experience points. The problem is that we know a lot of people don't know that information, even though we've put it in our books.
Yeah.
And that's something that I wrestle with. I know some people wrestle with the idea of alignments and don't use them in their games because they feel they're too restrictive, or they're not transparent enough. Like, what does chaotic good actually mean, right?
Yeah, I kind of feel like they lost their teeth. They don't mean anything in the game anymore like they used to. Look, there's like a couple places that it's like must be evil to attune to this item. But in previous editions, it was tied to the mechanics a lot more, features, spells, classes. Where now it's more just flavor. So
Yeah, and I think that's kind of because there was a sort of a fundamental shift in what the audience wanted. Not everybody in the
yeah,
audience, but I'm just talking the weight of the audience wanted the game to go this way, and so it went that way. When we did a bunch of when we launched fifth edition, of course, there was a huge amount of playtesting behind it, and a lot of decisions about things like how important should alignment be came out of those playtests. Um, and a lot of it came out of just also experience of, for instance, the detect. You remember the old detect evil spell?
mm-hmm.
Goes all the way back to first edition. A lot of groups use that spell to circumvent a lot of story. It's
Or
like you couldn't
justify
tell it.
terrible things.
Yeah, exactly. Like you couldn't really tell the story of the evil priest who had infiltrated the temple of the good Alliant deity, because all somebody had to do was cast that spell. It's like, he's the bad one. And
Yeah.
so spells can often short circuit a story, and mechanics can often short circuit a story. And I think one of the reasons why you don't see a spell like no alignment in the game anymore, where you
Yeah.
can just glean the alignment of every creature you come across, is because it actually created an unfun experience somewhere along the line
If
for
you
a
want to
lot of
have a
people.
mystery, a murder mystery, you have to remove the head. Uh,
Yeah, there's all kinds of hoops you have to leap through because of certain magic that could let you undercut the story. And so, that, of course, all that plays out over time. The game is always going to be evolving and changing to suit the needs of the audience at the time.
so, and you mentioned XP, and it's funny because, like, yeah, I talk to a lot of people, and I've yet to hear someone say that they use XP. Now, granted, like I talk to a lot of streamers and influencers and content creators.
A lot
Um,
of it has to do with the way you play too. Like, if you only play a game every so often, tracking XP is just a burden and often unnecessary, because you will never get XP either fast enough, it's the way you want to, or it's a math game in the middle of what's supposed to be a lot of fun. And
yeah,
I so
you know why we stopped tracking it in our games? Because it felt punitive to our friends that couldn't make the game that night, and like we're all adults, we're busy.
Yes, and that's another thing is if there's been some fundamental changes in so many respects. Like in first edition, you could have characters at different levels because everybody was tracking their own XP, and if you were attended every game, chances are you would be a higher level character than everybody else. But that imbalance creates a lot of weird dynamics at the table, and people just generally don't seem to like that, which is why we sort of have a move to a model where everybody advances simultaneously, so everybody's kind of the same level all the time. You're not penalized for that game you missed because your child was sick or whatever.
Yeah, I know that in earlier editions the XP charts were just different. Like if you were a rogue, you went up really twice as fast as the wizard, so there were going to be different levels anyway. It was
Right.
baked into the game.
Yeah.
So,
and there's a lot of weirdness associated with that too. It's like, why, on a cosmic scale reason, why is it easier to level up as a thief than it is as a
for the same reason we used to count backwards. I don't
know. For the same reason your armor class could be negative. I suppose.
Yeah.
Like this, it's once you start to look under the hood of some of those earlier editions, you kind of go, I guess that's just the way the world worked back then.
Yeah, pretty much. I know you're a super busy guy, and we are past the hour mark, so we'll wrap things up. Final words before we head on out.
Curse of Strod Revamped is on its way to stores and whatnot near you. I believe its official release date is the 20th.
In time for Halloween.
Yes, in time for Halloween. If you like Curse of Strahd or you like the original Ravenloft and you want a bigger box to take up more shelf space, a beautiful coffin-shaped box with some goodies in it, then
that's a pretty big box. I don't think it's going to fit. I don't think you could stand it on your shelf.
On the shelves behind me, I could not stand it. I'd need to take out one of the shelves to give it more space. So that's a challenge I'll need to overcome. But there are lots of little goodies in there, and I think if you're a fan of the original adventure, you'll like this as well. We put some things in there to make the DM's job a little easier.
Nice. I know I'm enjoying playing through Curse of Strahd right now. It's been a lot of fun. The DM has actually taken the book that's in there and made that much more interactive.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been kind of interesting.
Our CEO at Wizards, Chris, he was running a Curse of Strahd game and actually was doing a blend of Curse of Strahd with elements of like the Russian Revolution.
Okay.
So he did his own homebrew version of the game. I think that adventure, like a lot of our adventures, lend themselves well to customization. And I love hearing stories about how DMs kind of take something and twist it into something completely new for their own groups.
Absolutely. I just wonder what made him go, you know what this is missing? Russian Revolution.
Well, I've run a version of Curse of Strahd that the characters basically start off in their undergarments, trapped in the castle, and have to get out. They have no weapons of any kind, and becomes a sheer, run to see who gets out of the castle first. There are all kinds of ways you can play with the information that you're given, and I commend any DM who really kind of takes something published and makes it their own. That's what it's all about, right? That's a lot of creativity goes into.
That's why I don't run published adventures. I feel like to run them right, that's what you need to do, and it feels like a lot of extra work.
Yeah,
than me just making stuff
I keep
up.
telling people. Yeah, there's no wrong way to run a published adventure. Run it the way you want. Tear it to pieces. Use whatever shreds of it you want. Steal a map if that's all you want.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. It's great chatting with you. And until next time, everyone, stay nerdy.